The Paper Magician is a side-scrolling 2D platformer. The player will use paper to create spells and weapons to defeat enemies and obstacles in their way. The story of this game is what will immerse players and keep them interested. The story centers on the protagonist, a paper magician, whose lover is being threatened by magicians who use fear, hate, and blood to perform their spells. The player will discover the magician's story and work to defeat her enemies through the ideals of love and knowledge. The player will of course climb, jump, and run to explore levels, but they will encounter obstacles that will get in the way. To pass by obstacles, they must have gathered the required materials and combined them in the correct way to pass by. For instance, a chasm can be passed with the cardstock material if the player has found the spell to create a paper crane to fly to the other side. In other instances, players may encounter enemies and may use the correct spell to defeat them. Some enemies can be defeated with a paper sword, but others must be defeated with a pin or a quote from a book. At various points, the players will be given new materials and learn new spells. They will have a peaceful moment where they are able to combine the spell with the materials they have collected to see what effect each combination has before they will need to implement this in a puzzle or against an enemy. Players will choose their weapons and tools via an in-game menu that is brought up with a button click. They will then be able to select the correct material and spells for their purposes. Materials will be collected along the journey, and each will give hints as to its use. Using the previous example, the cardstock material will indicate that it stands up well to wind and water, implying that it would be good for creating a boat or plane. Each spell will interact with each material in a different way. In the chasm example, the player must select the spell and material to create the paper crane. However, some puzzles may require that they create multiple objects or a combination of multiple spells and materials. The player will have to explore these combinations and use the hints provided in the item descriptions in order to deduce the correct combination. The obstacles in the game vary from simple puzzles and physical objects that they must pass to more traditional enemies who are out to actively hurt the character. These enemies take the form of shadow figures that heavily feature skulls and other symbolism to show that they are aligned with fear and death. In the beginning, the player will encounter simple enemies and move on to bigger and more difficult enemies as they progress and delve further into the story until they reach the end and the final enemy. The concrete goal of the game is to pass all puzzles and enemies to reach the end. However, the game focuses heavily on the story of the protagonist, so the abstract goal of the game is to discover the story and see it to completion. This includes viewing all cutscenes and finding all memory collectibles to fully grasp and explore the story of a magician fighting for her love. For each level, there will be 3 main areas, one in which they are able to learn and practice new spells, one in which they will solve a puzzle or overcome an enemy, and one that furthers the story, either with a memory collectible or a boss enemy that gives further story information. In total, there will be 15 levels, which will be achievable with a small team and dense with player choice, action, and story. 2 of the most similar games to the Paper Magician are Limbo and Typo Man. Both are 2D platformers that feature a combination of puzzles, physics, and enemies, and a strong story to create an immersive experience. While the story is obviously different, the primary and most notable difference is the main mechanic of using paper as a medium to bypass obstacles. Aside from the obvious risks of a student team, I believe the only real risk with this project is the necessary artwork to make the world as immersive as possible. Because it is a 2D platformer, the player relies heavily on the artwork of the background to indicate level changes, mood changes, and indicators of clues or areas in which they might find collectibles. However, I hope to overcome this by ensuring visual clues are present, even in the most rudimentary way, which I believe will result in this game being highly successful.